Hi, welcome to this episode of Insights, and I am absolutely delighted. I mean, talk about, imposter syndrome. I'm sat next to the one, the only Professor Miles Berry. It's absolutely brilliant to have you here. But if people have been living under a rock, Miles, could you just give a little bit of a background about who you are, what you do? And
Of course, yes, happy to.
All of
so
that.
I'm a school teacher, really. I spent 18 years working across 4 different schools, had a great time doing that, and then made the move like 15 and a half years ago into higher education. So I'm working at the University of Roehampton. Most of my job is training the next generation of outstanding teachers. Roehampton let me out to do other interesting things. I was part of the panel that drafted England's computing curriculum, and I'm still very much involved with technology education and technology in education. Much of the time at the moment, that seems to be around generative AI.
And that is something that I really wanted us to talk about during our conversation, if that's okay. I got into teaching to make a difference. And when I first started teaching, I was like, I never want to be in leadership. I want to just teach children because that's where I have the most impact. But as I sort of grew up during my 20s, I realised that if I moved into leadership, I could have an even bigger impact because, I could actually have, I could help every student within my school, not just those that I had to teach in my classroom. Working with people who are trained to be teachers, I mean that must be an absolute joy and a real responsibility as well, right?
It is a great joy. I did 3 years as a head teacher, which was quite enough, thank you very much. And I missed the teaching. I also missed quite a bit of the sort of geeky working with tech stuff, but really teaching is a very big part of what I do in my role at the moment. So I train my teachers. One of the best bits of the job is going out and seeing them put into practice the stuff which we've chatted about at the university. So these observation visits, going and watching them teach, chatting to them, chatting to their mentors, absolutely the highlight of my present role.
So that sounds absolutely fantastic, and I love getting it. It's such an honour. I think it's a real privilege to be able to walk into classrooms and see other people doing their amazing practice and being just a part of all of that. So I'm spending an awful lot of time both talking about, and we've talked about it in some of our meetings that we're involved in with the BCS and what have you. It's around AI literacy, generative AI. Everyone wants to know about it. Well, I was keen to, because I often think, and we know that there's so much, things go in cycles, obviously, but so that question of are we nearly there yet is we're never going to actually truly be there. But one of the things that's on many people's sort of radars, lots of conversations, is around AI literacy.
Yeah.
It's been important, and sometimes I think it's actually more important to talk about just generally literacy with technology, right? But let's talk about AI literacy.
Yeah.
It's important for both students, obviously, but also for educators.
Yes.
How are you encompassing that with your work at Roehampton? And
Okay.
how can we, leading on, sort of think about that at a much broader level? Because it's all very well and good working with early career teachers, but there are many tens of thousands of teachers in the UK and beyond. So what can we do about it?
Generally, when people talk to me about literacy, I come back to reading and writing. And I think there are those twin components to this. What does this mean in terms of AI literacy or even digital literacy? So some of this is definitely about being able to make sense of the output from the machine. In the context of generative AI, this is being able to work with the response you get from whichever system it is that you're using. I think so much of this now is around criticality of what are the things you look for in the response from the machine to be able to tell whether it's hallucinated again or whether this actually is a reasonably sensible, reasonably appropriate response to the question you asked it. The other half of that, the writing of this, at a very simple level, this is about giving the right prompt. There's a lot of talk about prompt engineering, and you can buy books and you can go on courses and so on. My suspicion is that teachers are actually really good at prompting generative AI tools, because giving instructions, giving a clear expectation of what sort of response you want is very much part of the job description. It's what we do with our pupils day in, day out. So I think, I'm not going to say teachers are natural prompt engineers, but through learning to work with young people, with their pupils, with their students, teachers have become really quite adept at phrasing just the right prompt to get the sort of response they want. And if they don't, then continuing the conversation. The notion of AI literacy, I think there are three elements to this. And I mentioned that I was part of the panel that drafted the computing curriculum. And when we were thinking about that, we were thinking about the foundations, the applications, the implications of the digital for everything, really. I think a similar framework works for AI literacy, that teachers and pupils should have some understanding of the foundations for this, how this even works. They also, I think, need to be able to get very good at using this effectively, efficiently, safely, ethically, and then going on from that, considering the implications of this. I worry a lot around this makes learning so easy now that we take the effort out of this. You know, Willingham says, memory is the residue of thought.
Absolutely.
That unless the teacher is thinking about something, unless their pupils are thinking about something, the chance of that staying part of them is way, way lower than it would be unless they're doing the work themselves.
That's absolutely key, and it's lovely you mentioned that. Actually, I listened to Adam Webster from Caterham School talking about the importance. They developed a tool called Riley Bots, and in there they've programmed their AI to try and make it so that children have that learning struggle, because that struggle is important. And we know things about spaced and retrieval practice and how you need to tell your brain to remember.
Great teachers are good at this. You know, there's often much of the curriculum is a struggle for many of our learners anyhow. But even for our brightest and best, a great teacher will go in there and set challenge, will stretch that child, will give them the opportunities for that sort of independent learning that expert learners often really benefit from. Sorry, Mark.
No, absolutely. And thank you so much for coming back. And I knew this would be a great conversation, right? The paper I've read, which has really informed an awful lot of my thinking. It's interesting you mentioned Willingham. It was Hattie, William, and John Hattie, Dylan William, and Alan Harrington, I think. It's 13 things about AI and the consequences of AI. Viewers, go to bit.ly/paper on AI, you'll be able to find it. But in there,
citation in the footnotes.
in there, Miles, they talk about if novice teachers aren't able to interrogate the output. So let's say a lot of LLMs have learned by scraping the web. Well, things like learning styles persist.
Oh yes,
right.
If you ask it to write a lesson plan, very often it will talk about visual, auditory, kinesthetic, which we know not to be true.
But absolutely. But novice teachers might not know that.
Yeah.
Okay. And so in one of the parts of the paper, they say one of the potential consequences of using AI might be that the novices actually become even more novice, and it goes down. Whereas they talk about expert teachers because they know how to interrogate the outputs and can then work with the large language model to interrogate it and improve the response and all that. Aren't just expert, they then become the elite because they, quote, ride the machines.
Interesting. I've not read the paper. I will follow the link. This notion that it exacerbates the divide that is already present.
Exactly.
I suspect this is true for other things than teaching. And this notion that what knowledge still matters. And, we perhaps are starting to think about what comes after a knowledge-rich curriculum. And I see no reason to move away from a knowledge-based curriculum. But I'd like to get to what I might describe as a thinking-rich curriculum. Yes, we start with foundational knowledge. We know what a good lesson looks like. We know what effective pedagogy is like. But then we think about this in our context, and you could apply this across all sorts of domains. So bringing some of the criticality, the thinking, the curiosity, and yes, the intent into the human user of this system, I think is going to be really important.
Yeah, no, I do agree. I wonder what your thoughts were linking into the that part of the report that I shared then, about how we can best. I talk about potentially schools thinking about sort of coaching triads, right? So your expert teachers can actually work with novices to check the outputs and make sure, so there's a bit of quality assurance in there. But again, one of the reasons why you want to use AI, right, is to actually reduce workload, not bring in additional. Have you got any thoughts about how, though, we can actually quality assure any use by sort of early career teachers, given that you work with trainees?
So
we want to use it,
of
but
course,
we don't want
yes.
them to.
So I think there's a lot to be said for retrieval augmented generation, of not asking it to just create me a lesson plan from scratch or whatever. One of the things that seems to have worked well with my trainees is walking through the process. So I have learnt from bitter experience that if you just say, write a lesson plan, it tends not to be particularly good from a human or from a machine.
Yeah.
But walking through the process of, here is what the curriculum content is, here is what's on the exam spec, now talk to me about the learning objectives, about common misconceptions, about what prior learning this builds on. The sort of thing that good expert teachers work through automatically before writing a lesson plan. It is worth walking the machine through those steps as well. And then we get to, okay, so give me, it's very, very good, I found, at generating alternative ideas. So if you just say, write a lesson plan, it does exactly that. If you say, give me 5 ideas for this lesson, it will often come up with things that you've not thought of yourself. You say about quality assurance, but some of this, I'm sure, is about developing your intuitive feel for what works well with your pupils in your context, in the way that you teach lessons. Just saying, evaluate this against a set of, arbitrary, abstract standards may not be the sort of quality assurance that really matters. This is about autonomy and agency and personalization of teaching, if not yet quite learning. You can, of course, do the evaluation. You can give it the lesson plan produced and say, evaluate this against a set of quality standards, the school's learning and teaching framework, the DFE's core content framework, the teacher standards, and it will do a pretty good job of matching that against this. If you say in your prompt, I want you to be critical, I want you to give me really specific feedback on how I could improve that, it tends to be helpful there, rather than just saying, yes, this is fine, it clearly does this. So it's prompting well, I think.
Listen, I'm sure that you and I could spend far longer than we've actually got having conversations around this. I always love chatting with you, Miles.
Always a pleasure, Mark.
Thank you so much for taking the time to come and join us here at the amazing Bet Show. Listen, if you have been hiding under a rock and you aren't connected with Miles on social media, I'll tell you, one of the things I love about what Miles does, he is such a great sharer. He presents at events all over the world and he always shares his slides. He's also always very happy to answer any questions you might have and things on socials, whether you ask him publicly or privately. He's a really cherished national treasure.
The praise of the praiseworthy is praise indeed, Mark. You're too kind, thank you.
Where can people connect with you and find you online, Miles?
So I have a blog at milesberry.net. If you do a Google search for Miles Berry, it's either me or the eminent plastic surgeon. It's usually easy to work out which of us it is.
Brilliant stuff. So give Miles a follow and say hi from me. Thank you for joining us on this episode of Insights.